All right, well, everybody's here, so we might as well start, right? I'm Astrid Hilger Bennett, and can you all hear? Okay, is a little muffled?
You're a little muffled. Can you not pull it down and not you wear it? It's fine. You can take your mask off.
Okay, all right. Oh, it's been months. I'm Astrid Hilger Bennett, and I live in Iowa City, Iowa. So just a short drive from here, which has been really fun to make the trip today. So I'm delighted that the International Quilt Museum has this series of my work on display that I made during the pandemic. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a bit. But first, I wanted to let you know a little bit about my background and how I came to be here in this space. I was born in Germany, raised in New Jersey, went to school in Ohio and Indiana, and then in 1978 moved to Iowa City, where my husband had a job in the journalism program there. And while I was at Indiana getting my BFA, I was a printmaking student. And really, that's what I really wanted to do more than anything was printmaking. In my last semester, I discovered kente cloth and the African textiles. So instead of doing a composition that might be like a landscape or something like that, all of a sudden I discovered modular printing. And it was around that time that Jonathan Holstein's book, American Pieced Quilts, came out. And that was in the early 70s, such a mind-blowing experience to see that book. So I decided my last semester in school to take a textiles class so that I could think about printing on a textile substrate. You're welcome to come closer if our musical accompaniment is adding greatly. There's some space over here too. So when I left the program, my printmaking program, it was impossible for me to do printmaking at home, but I was really intrigued by weaving. And we lived in a geodesic dome on a farm and decided to get an 8-harness Kesnick loom, hoisted up the steps up into the geodesic dome, and learned to weave without running and dye without running water. So there you go. In 1978, we moved to Iowa City. The loom came with me. I did a lot of weaving. But at that time, working with dyes the instructions were not as well designed for permanence as they are now. So at that time, I felt that my pieces were just not what I wanted them to be. So it took me a while, but after a while, I got a teaching job for a year at the University of Iowa. And I discovered screen printing with polymer emulsion, which allowed you to take drawings, transfer them to silk screens, and print. And from then on, I was just doing painting and printing on cloth. Now, I think that I call myself a painter rather than a stitcher, a painter and a printer, because I like the drag of a brush on cloth more than on paper, but that's exactly what I like to do is paint and print. So all the fabrics that I have used in my quilts for 2 decades worth of making art quilts have been my own fabrics on the fronts and the backs. So I don't have a stash from the fabric store like a lot of people do, but I had my own stash. So a lot of the stash involved pieces that I had made for other projects, and I always printed enough or painted enough to have leftovers. And so they would end up in my wonderful, colorful closet. So roll forward to the pandemic. And, the first few months I had to go outside. And what I wanted to do is I tracked my garden growing in March and April and May by drawing on handkerchiefs and other things with India ink. I have to say that while I'm doing a lot of quilts, I'm also doing pieces that are tarps and scrolls, which some of you may have seen at the Hillestad Gallery a couple years ago. I don't know. But anyway, after I had completed that series and completed the 100 or 50 masks I made for residents at the University of Iowa Hospital and Clinics, I decided I needed something really meaningful to do. I just wasn't going to be able to sit, and it was better for me to keep working. So I started with the blue quilt over there that I thought, I'm just going to make myself a quilt. And I decided that I would make these all functional, full-sized, and they would be both wall hangings and useful on a bed. Yep, it's all painted fiber reactive dyes, and you get layering of colors when you layer those colors. The middle panel there, that looks sort of like a stained glass, that was done with an open silk screen, just with thickened dyes and layered over so you get secondary colors. I'll explain a little bit more about each of these quilts in a second and how I came about them. So for the pandemic, after a while, I used to co-own a gallery in Iowa City called Iowa Artisans Gallery, and I'm also president of Surface Design Association, which is a contemporary textile organization. And I had been watching during the pandemic all the issues with funding and the worries and so on, and I thought, I'm just having a great time piecing. I think I'd like to make this as a fundraising series. So I ended up not with one, not with two, but a total of 15 full-sized quilts that can be hung or put on a bed, and they're all meant as a fundraiser for cultural nonprofits and scholarship institutions. So now, I would not have been able to do this without Sarah Yoder Parker, who is a long-arm quilter. I was able to concentrate on doing all the piecing with my fabrics and then turn it over to her. And it was fantastic because she had a real sensibility that meshed with mine. She used to be an art teacher. And so her way of quilting these pieces is very much aligned with the way that I've always quilted my smaller pieces. I just have a single sewing machine, and it's a little harder to do really big pieces like that. And one of the reasons why I went to doing some other kinds of work besides art quilts is that they would take me so long to complete that I just needed something that could get the creative juices going a little faster. So I also decided during the pandemic that we all have so much stuff, and a lot of us are at an age where a lot of us artists have a lot of art pieces. So I decided that it was important to me to make pieces that had a dual purpose, that were also functional as well as art pieces. And so in some dystopian future when, there's a lot of work around, someone can use my piece to keep warm. So I've been doing that right now. So I was really delighted. I've been doing a lot of Zoom events. I've been working a lot of the Zoom events for Surface Design Association for Textile Talks, and International Quilt Museum is part of that series. And so I was delighted when the International Quilt Museum wanted to hang this series. This is 7 of the 15 pieces here, and one is hanging right now at the Art Equals Quilts Equals Art show at the Schweinfurth Memorial Art Museum in New York. So I have some other queries out as well. So I thought I would just talk about some of the individual ones. We can talk, actually, what I will do, for a second, I'm going to go grab a screen. So the way I handle the technical side of this is these are fiber reactive dyes. And fiber reactive dyes react with the fiber, with the natural fiber, at the molecular level. So they're very color fast and probably the safest dyes to work with, aside from natural dyes, for the home dyer. And the nice thing is I can buy 4 or 5 colors and then mix all my other colors from that. So you can use them for hand painting, for screen printing, for mono printing, all kinds of purposes, tie-dye and so on. So here I have an example of a screen, and this is basically can be used like a giant rubber stamp, or you can do it in a registered way to make yardage, which I did here. I did them measuring to make yardage. I have a 3-yard table in my basement, and I can just do long yardages. The way these are made is you take a drawing, and this was a hedgerow in the back of my yard, and then you make a transparency from it, and then you can use polymer emulsion to expose it like a photo emulsion. And in my house, I probably have 35 or 40 screens. So I have a whole library of images I can use if I want to. What you can see here is an image that I got by drawing peas from my gardens. These were pea pods. And in this, I had a screen which I did long yards of fabrics, and then I cut them up. That's one of the things I like to do is I'll mess around with painting and printing for a few weeks, and then I'll spend time cutting them up and piecing them another few weeks.
Does the paint take long to dry?
No, it doesn't take long to dry at all. It dries very quickly. It has to be steamed and washed out, and the washing out is a kind of a pain. But you know, if you later on want to touch some of the fabrics I brought, you'll see that it has a very soft hand. It doesn't feel like there's paint on it, and the dyes build up all these great layers of color. So now one of the other things that I do, and you can see it on, let's see, you can see it on here, all the little bits of bubbly sort of texture. That's done with monoprinting. And I take the thickened dyes, which are thickened with, oh, come on, Astrid. It's the stuff you thicken, it's sodium alginate, what you thicken ice cream with. And you thicken it to a certain amount, and then you just paint it on this this vinyl. And when you paint it on, usually I have a bigger piece, but I just brought this one. And I can just set it, I can place it on my table and figure out where it should go, and then I rub the surface of the dye off, and I build up some layers. So you can see on the pieces that I brought, which I'm going to just pull a couple of these out here right now, that there's a lot of monoprinting and screen printing on this one. And these are all monoprinted, and this has monoprinting and screen printing too. So that's another technique I use a lot of, and it's really fun. So I will put these back here, and you're welcome.
Talk about mono. What do you mean by that? Did I miss something?
Monoprinting has a background from printmaking, like etching and so on. Basically, it's like making a surface where you do the design, and then you do a one-off print, and it only works once. In other words, it's not like an etching where you'll do a whole edition. So
now, is there an example here?
these have monoprints in. Now, one of the things I did with all these, I took the smaller pieces that I had. Here are artist hands that I had drawn there. So I took and made these long strips, lots of different ones, and then I started piecing them together and seeing what else they needed. So this has a monoprinting. If you look closely at a lot of these, anytime you see a buildup of texture, it's probably monoprinted. So on this one, you're seeing the hand prints, you're seeing the tool screen prints, you're seeing just various things. So if you look closer, you'll see it. I wanted to say that all the backs are, you're not really supposed to look at the backs, but they are also making use of my fabric. So that's the secret side, that when people have them. In fact, I have pieces in the project art in the University of Iowa Hospital and Clinics. And one day I went there and it was hung backwards. And I said to them, wait a minute, that's not the front. And they said, well, we just loved the back so much we thought we'd switch it out. So basically, I would get panels I liked and then work on the colors that would go with it. And so for this series, I did have to dye a bunch of solid colored because all my fabrics start out white, except June was talking about this one. This, I bought that color and then printed on it. I was making a lot of napkins and things at the time. So this one here, hand painting, almost all hand painting. And this one really reminded me of a summer day. This one here, the pods of summer. I had drawn some peppers and things, and then I had other shapes that seemed to work with it. If you look in a little better light, you can really see a lot more colorway in that left-hand panel. I will talk about, let's see, this one here is another one, Airborne in Summer. I had this idea of flying over. This one here has an interesting story. The yellow with the dark. I can go over here for a sec. You can still catch me. So my family and I went to Wyoming, and I was just taken with these incredible grasslands and the endless miles. And I thought, I'm going to come home and I'm going to paint these subtle things. And when I came home, this is what came out. So,
are they just your imagination?
They are shapes. I would always say that it looks abstract, but everything I paint has a reference to the natural world, and also I'm a musician. So color and rhythm and sound and shape, it's all kind of one thing. This I made into a napping blanket for my mother who had MS. And so this was the leftover fabric from that. So that's how I had saved it for a while, and so it was fun to be able to use it for this purpose. And as you can see, Sarah had a great time doing these little wigglies back and forth, which I would not have done or been able to do with my sewing machine. So it was really fun to discover that. Here I had done just some painting, some trees. You know, when we're at this time of year in the summer when it's so beautiful, and then we lose all the leaves and we think, oh, it's such a loss. But then you look at the trees against the landscape and it's also beautiful in its own way. And this one, as I said, was the first one. And that one I used on the center. I just used an empty screen and just started building layering colors. And that the two lower panels is a lot of tedious hand painting. So all the fabrics, just so that you know, they are hand painted or printed or whatever. When I feel like they're done, I can usually go back into them if I want. When they're done, I steam them, I rinse them, I wash them, and then they're ready to use. So.
What kind of, do you use fabric paint?
No, I use Procian fiber reactive dyes. Yeah. I don't really like fabric paint because it's stiff on the brush. It doesn't give you a smooth line, and it also makes the fabric stiff.
Say that again, what kind of fabric paint?
Procian fiber reactive dyes. Yeah. So they work at the molecular level with natural dyes and natural fibers to create a pretty permanent situation. Does anybody have a favorite you'd like to hear a little more about?
I love the work with dark red.
The dark red, this one here?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually very pinkish, dark pinky.
It's not watermelon, right?
Nope. Nope.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is what you want. I have a friend who just had a major birthday and was once a museum exhibit designer at the University of Iowa. And I took his screens of the whaling scenes that he had made, and I printed the fabric on the back. So this quilt is made and has the fabrics on the back from that. So that's fun. Little secret side. That one? I'm partial to that one too. Thank you.
They look like leaves up at the top.
That is really leaf patterns. You know, the positive and the negative shapes are always important to me. Sometimes you manage it well. I think in the yellow it works. And sometimes you get things too close. So there's no erasing once I start. So it's the performance. You just get started and you go. But with textiles, the beauty is you just cut it up and make it into something else if it doesn't work, right? So, yes?
May we see photos or would you rather not?
No, that's fine with me, as long as it's okay with the museum. Yeah.
Now, do you have any padding in these?
Yes.
There is padding.
Warm and natural, 100% cotton, needle punched. Yep. Yeah, they're pretty heavy, actually. That's an interesting question because as a gallery manager, I had before I started quilting, I'd been making large wall hangings, but each one I had to think about how to hang it before I even hardly started. So when I was in the gallery and handling work for sale, I loved the fact that the quilts could be rolled up, could be hung, and I thought, wow, the feel of them, the tactile quality is just wonderful. And so even now when I do a lot of ink drawing and I do these polymer medium on my fabrics, I still love going back to actually the tactile quality of quilting and the tactile quality of stitching is, especially right now during the pandemic, has been so restorative, right?
So you were an adult.
Oh yeah. No, my mother grew up during the war, and she was a child, and in Germany, and they were digging potatoes pretty much for food. But my aunt, she taught me a lot of making stuff, and my first quilt was when I had a dollhouse, and I made one with Kleenex batting. So, but it wasn't until I was really, probably in my 40s that I started. So I had done weaving and wall hangings, but not quilted ones. So, but I've been doing the painting and printing all that time. So,
Astrid, I'm interested in
Would you explain for us, use the green one, what came first in that yellow pattern area?
Usually the black. Usually I start with outlining shapes, and then I decide what colors are going to go in there. And yellow is a really tricky color. It's just hard to get it to work right. If you go to a paint store, they usually are trying to discourage you from it. But that one seemed to work for some reason, you know. And so usually when I start painting, I put my 3 yards of fabric on the table, and it's like a dance. I'll get my nerve up to start, and I'll just get it out. It's the expressive side. And then I add the color. So, and for a while there, I was doing a lot of drawing outside on paper, and I'd come in and I'd draw the same things on fabric on the table, and then later on I'd come in and add color. So.
You know, you really got to look at, I didn't realize you had toothbrushes on here and pliers and stuff. You really got to get up close and look at these things.
Yes, that was because I was doing a piece based on tools, and I really was thinking about what are the tools we need in our life. We need a house, we need medical care, we need just odd little tools, you know.
Well, how did you get the numbers backwards?
That was a mistake.
Oh, but they add up, because I added them and they add up.
Yeah, it's backwards because I put that transparency on the wrong way.
Oh, but it looks really,
Yeah.
neat, though.
Yeah. See, observant. Yep.
So you start with prepared for dyeing fabric?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can thrift fabric too, and I've also printed. The printing, sometimes I use textile paints. The printing I will actually do sometimes on other, like fabrics for quilting or whatever. I've made pot holders and things like that, you know, for people. So, but yes, I use the prepared for printing because then I don't have to pre-wash it. And I order it by the bolt, and it's actually cheaper to do that. But if I want it, I have old tablecloths that I get from the thrift stores, and they work quite well too.
Wash them thoroughly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the story behind these. If you, just to let you know, because these are a donation for cultural nonprofits and scholarship programs. So if you are interested in it, I know the museum doesn't handle that, but I'm happy to talk to you about that. I have them on my website right now. So.
Is there a reason for hands in this one?
Yes, the hands came from a series I did on artist hands. And so I just loved the way they were. And the interesting thing was, so one of them was a good friend of mine who is now passed away. So it's really wonderful. She was a potter.
Did you trace their hands?
No, I drew them.
Oh, I mean, you didn't put the person's hand down.
No, we just looked at them. And
oh, okay.
So, any other questions?
It looks like you do both sides. I mean, as far as printing and
Yeah,
kind of pushed one back.
I don't know if it's kosher to do this, but yeah, see, this was a drop cloth that I had. So I just find things that work. And sometimes the backs are fabrics that really just don't make it on the front. You know, they're just not quite right, but they work great for this, for a backing.
Yeah. No, that's a cool idea.
So,
Recycle, repurpose.
yes. And my stash has gone way down, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.